In this tutorial, you're going to learn how to change the background image of an element when scrolling through the page. So this tutorial idea actually came about when someone asked a question on one of my previous videos, and that was to how to change the background colour of an element, and it was from ApplePeer15, who basically asked, can we change the background image of an element when we're scrolling through it? So for example, if we had one image, when we scroll to a certain point, we're actually going to change to a different image. And as a bonus, to have a soft transition between those two images, which is basically what I've ended up with here. If I scroll to the top of the page, we get the image of the lion, and scrolling slowly down the page, you'll see gradually, when we hit a certain point, the image of the lion gets faded out for the image of the elephant. So this is a relatively simple effect to achieve, and we'll be creating this from scratch in the rest of the tutorial. And by the way, if you do have your own suggestions for tutorials, feel free to post them in the comments below, or head on over to the Junior Developer Central Slack channel and post your ideas there. Okay, so let's get started and we'll head on over to Visual Studio Code where we'll start putting together the page for our simple scroll effect. So let's just start off by creating a bit of markup for the page. So I'll just create a document body and also just change the title of it here. So we'll say change background on scroll, for example. And then I'm just going to load in a little bit of content so we've actually got something to scroll. So I'm just going to create a couple of section elements, which we'll fill with some lorem ipsum text, just so it gives us some content to scroll throughout the page. And we'll put another one below there as well. And in the middle of that is where we want to have our images that we're going to change. So to start off with, I'm just going to create another section element, and I'm going to give that an ID of hero. And I'm going to add some style to that hero section as well, which for the moment is just giving it a height of 800 pixels, so it does take up some space on the screen. And I'm also going to give it a background image property too. And of course we'll need an image to actually insert into there, so let's head on over to a stock image photo site such as Unsplash, and we'll just do a quick search for lion. And this was the image I found before, so I'm literally just going to grab the URL for that at the moment and add that into our code. So let's add this into the URL property here. So now if we take a look at what we've created in the browser so far, you'll see we've got our two sections with text above them, and obviously our lion image is appearing in the middle. So let's tidy that up a little bit. First of all, we'll go back and remove some of the padding from around the body. And then we're going to put our background size to cover, which will stop it repeating on the page. So we have our lion image appearing nicely in the center of the page, but obviously when we're scrolling, nothing happens, it doesn't change. So we'll actually write some JavaScript so that when the user scrolls to a certain point, we'll actually flip that image out for another one. So let's go and add our JavaScript to the bottom of the page here. And I've just set up a simple variable called scrollAmount and assigned it a value of 0, and set up an event listener on the window to listen for scroll events. I'm also going to get a reference to the actual element itself that holds the lion image at the moment, and I'll call that hero_lm, and then I'll just get that with the document query selector function. And now I can use that to actually reference that hero element anywhere within the rest of my code. So in order for this to work, we need to know where the user has scrolled to on the page, and also where the element currently is, in order to determine whether or not we want to switch the image to the elephant. So on our hero element that we've selected, there is actually a function called getBoundingClientRect. And this gives us the result of where the element currently is on the page. So for example, we can get its top value, which is the value of where the element sits at the top of the page, and there is also left, right and bottom too. So the top property is the one that we want, and I'm going to access that by destructuring it from this function. And now we can say if that top value is less than our scroll amount, then we can swap out the background image that's currently in the hero element. But we probably want to take into account the height of the window that we're actually working with as well, so we'll subtract that from the top value too. And this should give us an accurate representation of when that element is visible on the page, and you'll see where the scroll amount value comes into it in just a second. So when we've actually scrolled the elements into view, we want to change the image in the hero element. And for the moment, we're just going to set that to a different URL. So let's head back on over to Unsplash and get an image of an elephant. And this was the one that I used in the example before. And again, we'll just copy the image address and go back to our code and then paste that into the JavaScript when the hero element has been scrolled into view. So if we go back to our page, we should be able to see that working in a fashion now. If we reload the page, we can see the image of the lion appearing, and if we scroll down just a touch, you'll see it changes instantly to the elephant. So we probably want to actually scroll a bit more of the lion before we actually start seeing the elephant image appear. So what I'll do is I'll adjust that scroll amount value to a figure that allows us to see more of the image before it's changed out. So I'll just say minus 800, and if we go back to the page and reload, you'll see the lion image stays for a good while. We can scroll right down until we hit a certain value and the background image is replaced. So that shows you the mechanics of how you can register a scroll event and make some changes based on how far the user has scrolled down the page. But let's go back to the original question and see how we can do that nice soft transition fade between the two elements. So what I'll actually do is I'm going to layer the two images on top of each other and just fade between the two, depending on that condition within our JavaScript, i.e. how far the user has scrolled down the page. So let's just add them here inside of the hero element. And instead of setting the background image here of the hero element, I'm just going to add both of those background images to the respective div elements that are inside of that hero container now. And we're going to be applying some styles to both of those div elements. But for now, let's just set their width and height to 100% of the hero container. So now if we look at the page, you can see the lion div element is there, but also the elephant div element is appearing as well. So to make them overlap, we'll set the position of these to absolute. And also we're going to set the background size to cover again. So going back to the page one more time, you can see the elements overlapping with the elephant image on top. So rather than using JavaScript to actually change the background image of one of these div elements, we're going to set the opacity property to either show or hide the actual image. So that will make sure that the lion image is displayed first, and then we're going to change the opacity property when we scroll down the page to show the elephant. So back in our JavaScript, let's remove this call to change the background image from here, and we're going to set up some selectors for those two new elements that we've created, the lion element, and also for the elephant. So if the user has scrolled past a certain point of the page, we'll set the line element's style property, or rather its opacity there, equal to 0, and then we'll set the elephant's opacity property equal to 1. And of course what we could do is have an else statement in here to say if the user hasn't scrolled past that certain point, or if they've scrolled back up, we'll swap those values back and show the line element again and hide the elephant. So let's go back to the browser again and reload the page. And whoops, so there seems to be something wrong there. Let's have a look. And oh yeah, the lion element, I've actually set that to hero again instead of lion, so let's update that. And now we're seeing our elephant. When we scroll back up the page, you can see the line reappears. Scrolling back down again shows us the elephant. And of course you can modify that scroll amount value to depending on where the user has scrolled to on the page. Of course, we haven't got our smooth transition at the moment, so let's go back to our code one more time. So up here in our CSS rules, we can simply add a transition property to transition the opacity for 2 seconds, or whatever time period that you feel is appropriate. And now when we scroll up and down, you can see we're getting the fade between the two images as the opacity of one image increases up to 1, whilst the other one decreases down to 0. So that's pretty much all you need to get the scroll effect and with the fade between the two images working. There is one thing that I would do to just tidy up the code, and so you don't need to have any if statements in here. Rather than have the if statement to check this each time, we can set a Boolean value called heroes in view, which is basically the result of our if statement condition before, and then we can just basically say the hero in view is true, then we can set the opacity to the lion as 0, if not set it to 1. And the same thing for the elephant. If the hero is in view, we want to actually set the opacity of that element to 1 to show it, if not hide it by applying a value of 0. And as you can see, that still works, fading between those two images. And for one final refactoring, if you're an absolute JavaScript geek, you can actually change the Boolean value to a number by applying a plus operator, and we'll invert the Boolean value for the first element so that it gives us a value of 0 rather than 1 in that condition. So it just helps to cut down on the code clutter, and of course allows you to reuse that hero and view value if you want to change other things on your page depending on what's actually scrolled into view. That's it for this tutorial. I'll put a link to the code in the description below. Hopefully you've learned some useful things, and if you do have a suggestion for a tutorial, feel free to post them in the comments below or drop me a message in our Slack channel.